Welcome to MFP Live. I'm Donna Ladd, the editor of the Mississippi Free Press, and my co-host here is Kimberly Griffin, the publisher of the Mississippi Free Press. Hey, Kimberly. And tonight we are tickled to have someone I think Kimberly and I both have known a long time. I have a feeling she may have known him even longer. Rob Hill is here tonight, and Rob is the state director of the Human Rights Campaign. And we're thrilled to have you, Rob. Welcome.
Thank y'all for having me. It's an honor. Yes, I've known y'all in my pre-career as a United Methodist minister, and so thanks so much. This is my second career, believe it or not. I've been doing this for 7 years now. So anyway, wow. It's hard to believe I've been in this world. So tell people I didn't leave the ministry. I just got a larger congregation.
Right. Well, and I was going to say, that's a natural progression. No, right? Of course. So I think Kimberly wanted to kick it off tonight. Do you want to get started?
So as you alluded to, we've known each other a very long time, longer than we care to admit. You are younger than I am. I will give you that.
Not much.
By a smidge. In fact, I saw a photo on Facebook the other day of some other people, and it's you and I are at separate tables in Bravo, which is a restaurant in Jackson. And I was like, there's me and Rob.
Spend a lot of time there.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your background for people who are getting to meet you for the first time virtually?
Yeah. I'm a lifelong Mississippian. I grew up in Forest in the public schools there where my dad was the superintendent of schools. We're a public school family, and went to another public school after that, Mississippi State University, where I majored in political science. Public relations. I should have done political science. But then I went on to Duke University, where I got my Master's of Divinity and became a United Methodist minister. And that's about the only time I really spent away from Mississippi was my time in Durham, and came back here to Mississippi to do what I felt called to do, and that was serve parishes in Mississippi, first in Utica, Mississippi, and then served almost 10 years at Broad Meadow United Methodist Church in Jackson and the Fondren area. So I enjoyed that. I had a wonderful experience, but my partner and I, we had worked together a long time during that. At the point where while I was doing that and enjoyed ministry, I felt duplicitous being a gay man in a denomination where I couldn't be openly who I was, and so I decided to do what a lot of people do, and we put out our resume. And Ryan got an offer in New York City, and so we were about to sign the dotted line on an apartment in the city and decided, why are we doing this? The job prospects weren't that great for me there, but we have friends in Mississippi. We love Mississippi. Our families are here. And so it put me on a trajectory to find a new career. And so I tell people, like I said, I didn't leave the ministry. I'm still preaching the same thing, love and inclusion. So it translates well. But Ryan and I had not given up his job here in Jackson. And so we decided to come back, and the Human Rights Campaign was looking to open an office here in Mississippi, and I was at the right place at the right time, and joined the Human Rights Campaign in 2014. I celebrated 7 years just this past month with the Human Rights Campaign. So a little over half the time I served as a United Methodist minister in Mississippi. But again, my story is like a lot of people's because of the fear of the stigma that exists for LGBTQ people, and the fear of losing your job, losing your friends, losing your housing, being denied service. Our solution as a couple was to run, and I don't blame people who've done that, and it certainly is understandable sometimes. But we weren't ready to do that. We weren't ready to give up. And there were already wonderful people who were doing LGBTQ civil rights work, but there had been no major organization or civil rights organization that had invested in it to this point. And so that's where I got to be in this. But yeah, I'm in the place where I love it. So I tell people it's a complicated relationship, as you both know, in Mississippi. But I'm glad to be doing what I'm doing, and it's rewarding, and it's challenging. But I'm an optimistic person, and so that keeps me keeps me knocking on doors even when I get a lot of no's, and hoping to affect change in the state.
So you said something. I always like to. This is what happens when you get two seminarians on a broadcast. We can go down a very slippery rabbit hole. But you said something, because we have viewers all over the country who will then be confused. You said, like, the denomination we know would not let you be authentically who they are, but there are going to be some United Methodists in Portland that are confused by that.
Yeah.
So maybe they'll be like, well, what? My pastor is gay. I'm confused.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thing to point out. I was 39 when I retired from the ministry and started this, but I really thought that when I came home from Duke and started serving in the Mississippi Conference, which is in the southeastern jurisdiction of the United Methodist Church, much different than where Portland is or any other jurisdictions, and it wasn't changing, and I wasn't changing. And I, like I said, it felt duplicitous for me to go on. I honestly, Kimberly, when I went to the district superintendent, who is the kind of the cabinet member for under the bishop that governs a conference, which mine was Mississippi. My boss. Who and I sat before him and said, I really had not even given thought that I would surrender my credentials. I'd even thought I might be appointed to extension ministry. And I was very optimistic, overly optimistic with that kind of goal. And he sat and said, I never would have brought charges against you, and nobody ever complained. He said, but the fact is somebody will, and you'll have to deal with that. And in Mississippi, likely I would face a challenging effort to remain a United Methodist minister, given the conservative nature of the Southeast and Mississippi. Let me say this: I love the United Methodist Church, and I devoted a lot of my time there. I was wombed in that tradition, and so there's so many wonderful United Methodists, and so many of my clergy colleagues and parishioners, were supportive, are supportive, and so they grieved over that. Not enough people grieved that we would change our policy as a denomination. But it was interesting because I served in Jackson at a church where I really enjoyed becoming a more open congregation. We were becoming diverse on many levels, racially, sexual orientation. Scott Crawford, our wonderful advocate, helped us to become a much more open congregation and understand, ableism, and so we welcomed disabled folks as a result. So diversity looked so different for me. Not what in Mississippi, diversity is often just around black and white, but it became so much broader than that. But my congregation was accepting of me, and because I think I was an effective minister and pastor, and so I don't blame them in any way. For me leaving the church. I say that I was a closeted pastor, but Ryan, my partner, reminds me that, he said, anytime you quoted Tina Turner or Cher in a sermon, you came out every time. And so they dealt with that. so I had a congregation that did welcome me. So that's a good thing to point out, Kimberly. Not all United Methodists are anti-LGBTQ or anti-accepting. There are many who are. And that church actually, as a result, I'll plug Broad Meadow United Methodist Church, has become the first and only reconciling congregation in the Mississippi Conference. And so they took a bold step. And a lot of them say they didn't do it for me when I was there because they were trying to protect me. But anyway, that's a really good thing to point out, that that's where there's still a whole lot of work to do. And it's because of that conservative bias and theology that's really behind a lot of the what we have to fight at the Capitol and places around the state and the country.
Yeah, it was funny. We had a friend. This is how old am I? 25 years ago when I was in Anderson, and he said he was announcing that he was coming out, and we did not realize that he thought we didn't know. So we were like, "Oh, okay." It was a funny moment. He was like, "Well, we're still having a party." So,
yeah.
Okay,
and so, sorry, I cut you off, Kimberly.
No, go.
But no, I just, it was that does damage to relationships.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because I didn't want to be out, but
Right.
you know, I was protecting myself and feared
Right.
that if I did come out to people openly, that they might not want me to be their pastor because of the way they felt. I was reading, if you ever read Parker Palmer, and it was hard for me to read Let Your Life Speak. And I got to a point and I closed the book because he quoted Rumi. And Rumi says, if you were inauthentically among us, you are doing us irreparable harm.
Ooh.
I was doing myself irreparable harm. But, you know, I was doing irreparable harm to relationships because I couldn't be fully authentic. I was with a friend last night. She said, I was so glad when you finally came out to me because you weren't just my pastor then, but you were my true friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, that kind of authenticity that I got to experience among friends. And I came out to a lot of people in the church as I felt comfortable. It shouldn't be that way though, but that's the way it is. But.
Right. So this is a question I've actually always wanted to ask you. It was Donna's idea. How you talked about how you became state director of the Human Rights Campaign. What do your days look like? What is your time spent doing in Mississippi in this time we're in?
Well, I just filled out my timesheet today, so I can get paid next week. So I had to choose between what kind of C3 work and C4 work I was doing, but I do both. We have a foundation, and we have our policy side, which are our C4 side. But let's just say there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work to do in the state, and so you know I spend a lot of my time during the session at the Capitol pre-COVID, but certainly very plugged into what's going on, fighting against legislation that we have what we've seen, but also working on some positive pro-LGBTQ legislation. But you would have found me a couple of weeks ago sitting at a lunch table in Starkville, Mississippi, with an alderman and a pastor there in Starkville, talking about some work we're doing on the municipal level. So that's where a lot of success we really found. You know, 5 Mississippi cities have passed fully comprehensive non-discrimination ordinances around the state. Jackson the first in 2016. So on the policy side, I've done that. But you know, yesterday I was talking to the Capital Area SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Workers in the Capital Area, about how they can create inclusive spaces and create employee resource groups. And I specifically talked about LGBTQ affinity groups that exist within organizations, and talking about why that's important to have folks that you can understand and have allies and advocate for and within a company. So it's like drinking from a fire hose. I was sitting in my office today emailing with some hospitals in the state, you know, trying to get them to participate in our healthcare quality index survey. So that's some of the C3 work that I do. And then I get a call from somebody who got fired from their job because they think that because they think it's because of their sexual orientation. And so, you know, I get those kind of calls too. So my normal day there's no normal day for me. But there's just so much work to be done. But, you know, we also, like I said, we've got people around the state who are engaged in this kind of work. So I'm not the only one. I'm not in a silo. I'm one of the only paid people to do this kind of work. So, you know, we try to partner with people as best we can around the state. That was kind of a long answer that I cannot tell you an average day. I couldn't. It ranges.
I think that rolls well into my next question, which is give us the lay of the land from your perspective about where LGBTQ rights and realities for people could stand right now, because it seems like it's been, at least from, you know, me looking in, it looks like it's been a real roller coaster, you know, in some ways. So just give us the lay of the land.
That's an excellent question. This past summer, June 15th, 2020, the Bostock decision was handed down. Really unexpectedly, we got a very positive decision. And that was a case where it was around employment discrimination. And so Bostock decided, or the Supreme Court decided in the Bostock case, that sex under the Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act does extend to sexual orientation and gender identity, meaning that LGBTQ people are protected in employment. That's one of the things that we've been working to change. That's one of the things that ordinance help us to do on the local level, but that's one of the things we're working on the federal level to do. And that would be even a more comprehensive thing. It would say once and for all that under the 1964 Civil Rights Act that, that LGBTQ people are protected not just in employment, but in housing protections, public accommodations like a hotel or a restaurant or anything like that we couldn't be denied service. But it also extends to jury service, credit, all kinds of things like that. So we're still working on that. We've had that passed twice in our pro-equality House under Speaker Pelosi. And we've had that, and of course, right here at the beginning of this term, the House passed it. We're still not able to get it over on the Senate side because of the filibuster. So we're working hard on that to convert Republicans, and we do have bipartisan support for that. But because of Bostock that was passed, the decision that came down in June, we faced an onslaught of legislation that was intended to roll back rights of LGBTQ people. And one of those things was the latest iteration of those bills were anti-trans bills. It's a real wedge issue, talking about athletics and things like that, and bathrooms, even though really the bathroom stuff and, marriage and anything like that for same-sex couples, that stuff, attitudes have changed around that. And that's why they're going at the trans community, because there's still so many stories to be told, and so much, so many, we got to get folks to know their trans neighbors, and they're all around you. They're very small as a percentage, but because of the fear factor that exists, our opponents who are doing, I should say, a really good job at doing a really bad thing, because they know that this is a fear factor for a lot of people. They're attacking the trans community. And so that's why we saw this year the athlete bill, the trans athlete, which would ban trans females from participating in women's sports or girls' sports. There's just there's no issue of this. At least in Mississippi and any other place this year where they've argued this, because it was one of those that really did take hold and caught fire around the country. Mississippi was the first to pass that, even though we had worked really hard, and we really thought we had that defeated until the governor came out in support of that, and it got momentum. But we're seeing that. We're also seeing trans medical bans on medical care for minors, and not just bans, but making it a penalty or a criminal act for a physician or anybody to provide any kind of medical care to trans minors. We beat that in Mississippi this year and killed that in committee, and we did also in Alabama. But anyway, so what I'm saying is we did see this year, because of the Bostock decision, we have the most pro-equality president and vice president in the history of our country, and the executive orders that he promised to hand down, and he did, and we're glad. But because of that, those pro-equality measures, because of the Bostock decision, we saw the worst year as far as anti-LGBTQ legislation across the country, and so it's a challenging time. It's really sad for me personally to see this affect trans folks, especially trans minors. And we're working, I should have said this earlier. One of the things that we really leaned in on was our trans justice initiative, because of, bills like that, they only perpetuate the bias and the stigma that exists against trans people. And, in Mississippi, the second trans murder that occurred in the country was right here in Mississippi in January with Dominique Jackson, and in Jackson, Mississippi. And our answer to that was anti-LGBTQ legislation, specifically anti-trans legislation. And we're talking about a population that's already so vulnerable, particularly trans women of color, Black trans women of color are being targeted every day. I tell people, as a gay man, yeah, I fear being denied service in a place, or denied housing and things like that. Trans Black women get up every day afraid of being killed. And so we've got, we're working on, to answer your question or go back to that, we've got a lot of work to do because of the onslaught of anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ legislation. But we've just got a lot of work to do to get people to know their neighbors and to stop this epidemic of violence against trans people.
I want to push in on that just a little bit more. This idea of, because I know that you must spend a lot of time talking one-on-one to legislators who are on the quote unquote other side, and people who aren't in the legislature. And you also mentioned, and I kind of want to put a fine point on this too, wedge issues. And for anybody who might be watching this who doesn't know what the lingo means, that is basically an issue that is just used to drive a wedge between groups of people, but ultimately between people who could get together. This goes all the way back. Carrie Lee Merritt was talking, the historian, on here last week about how planters were trying to divide poor Black people and poor white people on political issues. Basically the same thing. It's like coming up with that issue that is going to drive a wedge between people and keep them from voting together, right? So definition over, but back to my question is, talk a little bit about, well, I guess what's that's like to talk to people one-on-one as human beings about these kinds of issues that affect children, that affect your daily lives, that even you as a man of faith, that feels like to you, that you have something in common, and then presumably see them vote a completely different direction. What are the lessons for all of us in that, I guess?
Well, I'll say, it's when things like that happen, especially when I built relationships with folks, it's a professional loss for me, but it hurts me personally because I take this work very personally. And so, yes, when somebody I've loved for years voted for HB 1523, it did create for me it was a challenging time for me to see somebody do that. And that was the bill, the so-called Religious Freedom Restoration Act that occurred in 2016. And we can get into that, but yeah, it hurts personally. But I'm optimistic, and I get up, and ready to work for the next day. But I will say this, that I have to keep going back to these folks and having these conversations, even with people who voted for disappointingly voted for that trans athlete ban that occurred this year, because I'm not going to get anywhere in Mississippi if I don't sit down with folks. I tell a really interesting, a funny story that we have a lobbyist in Mississippi that we contract with, and it's dear friend of mine. Of course, now you can't not be good friends with your lobbyist, but she slyly got me a table with some Republican lawmakers a few years back, and about 30 minutes in, one of them said, I didn't know actually what this meeting was about. When they said HRC, I thought it was the Harrison County Republican Committee that I was meeting with, and yet, but we had this really good conversation that was, I think, we built some relationships there. And so, but one of the things too, is let's admit though, that I get to a table and get to those tables because of privilege of being a white male. And I understand that it's not right. But there is privilege there. And so I want to be sure that I'm standing in the gap and speaking for people that can't get to that table. But I'll tell you, it was a powerful moment a couple of years ago when we had a lobby day, and several of our trans Black women advocates, volunteers, I said, they took they took our agenda into the speaker's office. They took the agenda into the lieutenant governor's office. And so it was really fun to get them in those spaces to have these conversations with folks and to advocate. But yeah, I can't not talk to folks on both sides of the aisle. And I'll say, as a result of that, we have found common ground on issues. Our hate crimes bill that we're trying to update to include to mirror the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Act of 2009. To include sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. We have bipartisan support for that in both chambers. We have bipartisan sponsors for that to pass a pro-LGBTQ bill legislation, and so that is that's stuff that it's rewarding, and it's and I'm happy that we're able to do that and to find that common ground. But then again, you mentioned, Donna, those wedge issues that when we made that success, when we found that common ground with folks on these issues, wedge issue like this trans bill comes along, and it has this effect of creating the wedge that it's intended to, even among people who might be considered more to the left or socially more liberal, because there's still this misunderstanding and misconceptions and just outright lies that people continue to tell and perpetuate against the trans community. So, and I'll say, when they passed those anti-trans bills, yes, they found that spot where we still have a lot of work to do, but they're intended to disenfranchise and further disenfranchise the whole of the LGBTQ spectrum. So that's it. I think I touched on everything that you said, but we can go back if you want to go back.
You touched on something that I have not been thinking about that I haven't really thought about until this year. And that is that a lot of the LGBTQ activists we see have been very white over the last decades. For example, I am a big history buff, and I didn't know who Marsha P. Johnson was until probably 2018.
Yeah.
And have since gone back and watched some documentaries and seen these people of color and people of having a different experience. Particularly, I think in the past, what has been presented to the world as the LGBTQ activist is the white male. And in some cases, the white woman. But a lot of times it's the white guy out front doing the things. Talk about your efforts at intersectionality in Mississippi and how it's going for you.
Well, I'll say that, you're exactly right. And I think that we dealt with that as an organization, or we've been dealing with that over the years. I think in our history, we were known at some point as, a white, gay, cisgender. And when I say cisgender, I probably should make sure cisgender means somebody who identifies with the gender they were assigned at birth, as opposed to a transgender person. But yes, it was mostly white folks who had means to support this movement. But yes, that's a place where, one, on our Trans Justice Initiative, we really tried to lean in to make sure that we're reaching out beyond just that stereotype of white males in the movement, because it's certainly not. I mean, I think it's important. You mentioned Marsha P. Johnson, but the Stonewall riots were trans women of color who led that. Right. And so if you want to talk about the history of the LGBTQ movement, before HRC ever existed in 1980, it was, a group of folks, trans women of color, who said, I'm sick of getting, hit by the police and arrested and things like that, and I'm going to stand up and do something about it. But yes, I mean, I do my best to lean in when I can. LGBTQ civil rights are our issue, but we also recognize that we're not a monolith as a LGBTQ movement. And so as somebody who is gay, I'm marginalized, but somebody who is a person of color and LGBTQ people, a person is multiply marginalized. So recognizing, the things that people have to experience, the racism that people still experience, and couple that with the anti-LGBTQ bias. And so, really trying to find ways where we can, support the whole of the movement to be intersectional. To recognize that we as an LGBTQ community are as diverse as the fabric of our country. And the fabric of the world, for that matter. We exist everywhere, in every color, in every religion, in every language. And so, it's important to recognize and to advocate where we can lean in those things, in those issues, for things just beyond, say, marriage. And that's an interesting thing to go back to. For a lot of people, marriage equality was not the singular issue. Their issue was being kicked out of their house. Their issue was being denied that housing, or being denied service, being denied credit. And so that was the issue for them. And that's why we're still working for that. Yes, I mean, we couldn't be successful in this work, or even call ourselves a civil rights organization, if we're not, responding to the multiple ways people are rejected and marginalized and continue to be discriminated against. And I'll say one of those ways. Sorry, we partnered with Stacey Abrams over in Georgia with her project to make sure that we're doing everything we can, and we are right now with all of the efforts to further disenfranchise voters of color, specifically around the country. So that's one specific area where we really tried to be good partners. And Stacey's a fellow Mississippian too, so it's good to work with her.
And we know her mama.
That's right. I served with both of her parents in the Mississippi Conference.
So, kind of one of the things I noticed over when Obama was elected, one of the things I noticed was that people who were in power in a number of ways kind of started to realize they were going to have to change, or they were going to lose business, or their kids were going to stop talking to them. Like, it was grudging, but they weren't like kumbaya, but they were like, gotta get some different people on my team. Like, they were moving along in a direction. And then when Trump was elected, they just went, oh, I don't have to do anything differently. Like, I can operate as I was operating.
Mm-hmm.
What effects did the Trump administration have on your efforts?
I was in a conference today, and I almost teared up when we had a member of the White House staff speak to us. One of our partners, the Equality Federation, also based in DC, hosting a summit online right now. But just all of us were like, oh my gosh, here's a presidency or a White House that recognizes us again. And the Obama administration, they evolved around this too. But yes, I mean, the past 4 years have been devastating for so many people. And and I even say, I've said before, the trauma that's been caused because of the rhetoric that we heard from him specifically, but also the way it emboldened so many other racists like him. And not just racist, but homophobic, transphobic people. And so to the damage that could have been done and was done certainly in the last administration, was terrible, and we're doing everything we can to reverse that. Specifically around healthcare and when they were the whole his order to be able to deny benefits for trans folks and the LGBTQ folks. So, that those things, or deny trans patriots to be able to serve in the military and things like that, that were obviously been reversed with this administration. But yeah, I mean, just the uptick of hate crimes that we saw against so many demographics, certainly Asian community here in the last year and a half, specifically with all the rhetoric around COVID. But yeah, we saw an uptick in the last FBI report against trans bias motivated crimes against trans people, and certainly even so against gay and lesbian and bi folks. So it was a traumatic 4 years and a damaging 4 years. And I think we thought we were so far along. And you realize that there are so many people out there that still have such hate. and still have so much fear. And then somebody like Trump can come along and pander to that fear, and be successful. And that was really that was one of the hard things.
And for me, one of the things, and I will preface this by saying that our producer calls me a bulldog. I don't know if that's true, but I'm very like, this is for me. And I didn't have a lot of people. I didn't even have any. I had no close friends. I had no deep relationships with anybody that supported that administration. Any of my friends that were Republican like fled the building. It was that moment where you say, "Oh, you don't like me," like, gosh, that's interesting. When I see that sign in your yard, you don't like me, like, or you want bad things to happen to me. And if you encounter those folks and said, "Well, no, that's not what I mean," and I was like, "Yeah, it kind of is, because this is what you're saying is okay." And it was troubling to a number of my other friends that had have multi layers of conversations all over their friend groups and families, and say to people, this is what this is saying to my kids, and they can't be around you. Yeah. Like it was like I had friends having the worst conversations with people that they loved, and they were like, and so it was tough. We would leave. I had a friend group, and we would leave for Thanksgiving, and they would say, "Pray for me. I got to go to Thanksgiving, and your Thanksgiving is not going to be like my Thanksgiving. Y'all just go sit around and talk about, it's like I'm going to have to shore up and may have to leave." But for me, I think it needed to happen, because maybe not in that way, but people had to encounter their racism, their homophobia in people they love, that was eventually going to come out one way or another. But it came out it was so in your face.
Yeah.
It was like screaming at you. So that was not a question as much as it was a soliloquy.
Well, and look, I feel the same way. I took it so personally. I was working in 2016 down in Florida. I got deployed there to go and get out the vote for Hillary. And I mean, I was absolutely devastated, but just after that, but yeah, I mean, I've had situations where I've had to be removed because it just made me so angry to know that people were supporting this person. And I'll be honest, I mean, relationships have been heavily damaged or even severed for me. Because people openly supported this man who was a misogynist, a racist, a homophobe. I mean, do we go down the list?
Right.
But anyway, but yeah, I hear you, and it's a tough one.
Okay, sorry, had to unmute. Wow, I mean, I'm just kind of sitting here listening, and I don't know. It's like I'm still stuck on, Rob, what we're kind of talking about with wedge issues, and even now with all this critical race theory, you just kind of want to go to people. If you look at the last 10 or 20 years, it's often the same group of people just finding something else to get you to hate on once you kind of got past the last thing. Like you were saying, people getting more accepting of having LGBTQ people around them and in the workplace, etc. So now they got to go pick on trans kids. Yeah. I mean, it's just I don't know this. I don't even know that there's a question here either. It's just that you're kind of bringing all this stuff up in me, because it's like this, and especially with it being kids. And now, and now we're sitting here in the middle of a pandemic, and here in Mississippi, and a lot of people are just completely shocked that that people talk very coarsely about young people in schools and try to say they can't wear masks, And so my head kind of puts it all together. It's like, we've just kind of have, at least in the last 10 to 20 years, but really always in certain communities, like where Black kids were targeted by police for so long, et cetera. But we've always had these like attacks on children that get caught up in our politics. And I'm just I was so mad this weekend at some people I saw on social media that I'm still kind of sputtering over it. But it I don't know, there's a continuum, isn't there? That where there's just this one thing after another, and go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Donna, I think that I've said this. I think people whose ambition is to further or perpetuate discrimination are really good at it and doing a bad thing and finding those things that, like you mentioned, critical race theory. That's a perfect example. I mean, of that, and it's certainly not anything of what it's lies that folks are putting out around what critical race theory is and what it does. I mean, telling the whole story of our country. But the way they say it is it's all about hating America, and then taking a Martin Luther King quote and completely distorting it. And this, so they find these things and they distort it, and they know because it works. They've done focus groups around this, especially around the issues that we're working on in battling the anti-trans legislation and stuff like that. They find things that in ways in messaging that works, and that's why I say the people who are trying to do some really bad things are really good at what they're doing, and they're pretty resourceful. And so CRT or critical race theory, trans issues, all that kind of stuff are just perfect examples where people are being, preyed upon, or their bias that exists within them is preyed upon, and it motivates people to support these kind of things. So it's just an example of the kind of the work that we've got to do to message in another way. So I'll tell you, it's very frustrating. We were celebrating the flag coming down, and I told people that I said we're going to solve LGBTQ issues in Mississippi before we get that flag down, and to have some of the very same people who were instrumental in doing that, touting or pandering to or throwing out this red meat around critical race theory and stuff like that, which is completely belies anything that the good that they did with bringing down the flag. So it's frustrating.
Well, and I think on that note, I think it's a perfect example of what we're talking about, though, because the flag had kind of gotten to the point where bringing it down was better politically with even some of the people who 10 years before or whatever. So it's another one of those issues that, okay, well, we can move a little past this one, but then we got to go double down on critical race theory. And it's, and I just have to say it out loud right here. It's like critical race theory teaches exact opposite of what a lot of people say. It actually teaches that race is not really a real thing. Not that white people are supposed to that Black people and white people are supposed to hate each other. I mean, it teaches the thing that we all need to be thinking about,
Yeah.
And so I just want to say that right here.
Sure.
It's just so wrong. But so I think I could melt this into another question. You talked at the top, right, about how you had thought about leaving Mississippi, and I left Mississippi, didn't think I was coming back. Kimberly's been gone from Mississippi at points, right? And we're here. So we talk a lot in our state about brain drain and the issues there. And so I guess what I would ask you is that we're sitting here in a state that, so easily gets sucked down into these wedge pits, over issues that are very harmful and hurtful to people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you talk to young people about who want to leave, or do you try to get people to stay? I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, again, I don't blame people. I get it. I don't like it, but it's a reality. And I saw a legislator or some leader this past year, reference the fact that that it's not because of our lack of embrace of diversity and inclusion that people are leaving. Well, that's just not true. It is because of that. When they pass bills like HB 1523 and 16, and then they pass these anti-trans bills like that, and refuse to change the flag for so long, folks are leaving, and not just LGBTQ people. And I know this. It's young people in general who have just moved on these issues, and just the acceptance is there that we didn't see in generations previous to that. So it's definitely something that we that is caused by a lot of these, like you said, wedge pits and things like that. One of the arguments I make when I go to communities, and like I said, we've had a lot of success on the municipal level, and I talk to these mayors and council members and aldermen, and I'm, trying to encourage them to, pass pro-equality measures, specifically non-discrimination ordinances in these cities. And I let them know this can have an effect on, it's an economic benefit to your city. It can have an effect on the kind of retention that you'll experience for your young folks, and the kind of recruitment effort that you'll have for folks to come into your community, specifically businesses, because businesses are getting this. They're understanding, why diversity and inclusion is important for, like I said, recruitment and retention. I wish cities would do that. Of course, I wish that the legislature and our statewide leaders would have the same mind to do the same thing and catch on to this, because it is really important. But I was sitting with a mayor in a city, and I was talking about all the benefits, and they said, "But isn't it just the right thing to do?" I said, "Well, yeah, you're right. It is the right. I should have started there." But it is the right thing to do. But one of the things I also say, and you mentioned youth, young people, and I want to go back to just youth under 18 and things like that. I tell mayors and aldermen and or folks who have the power to create these positive changes. I say, you don't know the young person in your community who might be thinking about taking their life, because
That's
disproportionately right. Suicide is and attempts of suicide are higher among LGBTQ youth. You don't know the kind of lives you may be saving. It's not just about your businesses and the retention of your employees and businesses. You're saving lives, because you say in that moment that a young person is valuable. And you want to talk about all your faith and all of your religion. One of the things that Jesus says is love your neighbor. And that's just right there with loving God. We're not loving our neighbor when we're passing laws that disproportionately or that negatively affect and harm our neighbors. And so it's not just about losing those folks to other states. We're losing lives. And so, that's the argument that I want to make to these folks, to these leaders. And I do my best because I know these stories. I hear these stories, and we know the data. And just, in just the last few years, our surveys reveal that we have such a so far to go on these issues. So, again, I'm a preacher, and I'm starting to preach, and so I'll stop. But that's, that's the kind of argument that I try to make to people. I tell people I go out and I peddle equality, but it's free. You don't have to buy it. But it can have so many positive effects for so many people and so many lives in your community that you never know.
Well, I'll just a quick comment, and I'll kick it to Kimberly. It's like I'm so glad you said those things, because it really just makes me so crazy when you have the same people who kind of hand-wring about brain drain, who then hawk these wedge issues around and support these kinds of legislation that run our young people off. I mean, it's just and not just young people. It's like a lot. Just because you're from Mississippi doesn't mean that you go along with all that stuff, and so anyway, so it's very frustrating to watch. But I'm a big believer that we should have a real conversation about a lot of the causes of brain drain.
Yeah.
But Kimberly, if you want to take it, go for it.
Well, y'all made me think of something. I listened to, I don't know, I was at the Mississippi Book Festival 2 years ago, and there was a former evangelical there on a panel. I think he's now a Buddhist Pentecostal. A Buddhist Episcopalian. He's kind of created his own
Buddhist
thing.
Episcopalian. What's the difference? I'm kidding.
Well, no, he said he was both. He said, I am both a Buddhist and an Episcopalian. I believe that's what he said. But he was talking about kind of the decline of the church, and I'm going somewhere with this. And he said that that statisticians are looking at it wrong. He said what is happening is that people move 6 to 8 times, whereas people used to go to college and come back home at the most, or go to the army and come back home at the most. Mm-hmm. And he said every move you got to shore up and try to go find some new people, and it's just hard. He said, but also every move exposes you to people you've never been exposed to. Yeah. And so we've already got young people leaving the state for economic opportunities, maybe the first reason they leave, or cultural opportunities, although I think we have great culture, so I'm biased on that point. But then they get somewhere and they meet some people that they may have not met, particularly because our school systems are segregated. Mm-hmm. Talk to some people they didn't talk to, and every move adds a layer of why they aren't coming back to Mississippi. Yeah. Which I thought was interesting. And so let's talk a little bit about the the pandemic. I know that HIV, and kind of merging two things. I know HIV and AIDS are still a serious problem in Mississippi, particularly among Black Mississippians. What is the HRC's role in helping stop the spread? And two, are there any lessons from the AIDS pandemic that could apply to this pandemic? That's a big question for only.
It is a big question, and we're that's an area where we are trying to lean in and do a lot more work. We hosted a panel or a conversation with Dr. Dobbs a few weeks ago, because the state is now, this is a really positive thing. This is some of the good news for Mississippi. Mississippi, and I want to make sure we say this. We should be saying this from every pulpit, every opportunity, that that the state is now offering free PrEP, which is a life-saving drug that can prevent over 99% is effective against HIV transmission. And so that's one of the things we want folks to know, and getting out there and trying to get the word out. And that's where I hope the state will invest in that. A lot of times, though, unfortunately, this is the perfect storm because of the stigma that exists. And again, anti-LGBTQ legislation that's passed, it has so many effects, and one of those is, like I said, perpetuating the stigma. And so, yes, a lot of people, don't feel comfortable talking to their doctors about their health and every aspect of their health, and so that's a lot of times because a lot of our physicians aren't as competent as they should be around issues that affect LGBTQ people, or just health, or around STDs and transmission, right, of all that kind of stuff. So one, we're trying to get the word out about all of this, but do our best to partner with great organizations that are doing this work and are dedicated to it, like My Brother's Keeper, based here in Jackson, right. Dr. June Gibson, and but yeah, I mean, going back to the pen, yes, I think that, as this is where the history is. When you talk about the history of the movement, folks who are older than me remember what it was like to live through that pandemic that still affects a lot of people, still is a pandemic. But yes, there is, I think, a lot of folks that lived through that, especially in the 80s and up until the mid 90s or late 90s, when we finally got developed these really life-altering, in a good way, drugs to combat that virus, know what it's like to live in fear around that, in a way that people may not who have experienced this pandemic. So there's a history there, especially, like I said, for older gay men or LGBTQ folks that doesn't exist there for other people, because they know what it's like to fear transmission. And fear losing your life. And so yes, there's a history there that definitely exists in the LGBTQ community. And the other part of that is to recognize that, the LGBTQ people have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic. So many LGBTQ people work in service industry. So many LGBTQ people work in healthcare, more on average than folks who are not LGBTQ. So when they were having to take care of folks who were affected by the pandemic, or when they lost their jobs, it was disproportionately, it affected the LGBTQ people.
Well, this has been kind of a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I will have, you got 2 minutes. You got one more question to answer. You cannot use your preacher timing. As I used to tell Keith Tonkel, our pastor, you can't use pastor count. You gotta use real count. A recent study found that Mississippi is the only state without an openly LGBTQ elected official. What does that say, and why does it matter?
Yeah, I saw that from the Victory Institute. To my knowledge right now, we don't have anybody who's openly LGBTQ. I'm pretty sure we do have people who are closeted. And so that speaks to the fact that people don't feel comfortable coming out. But I also want to recognize we have had elected LGBTQ folks in Mississippi. Mike Carroll up in Ashland was a council member, Mercedes Ricks down in Magnolia. And we have had several LGBTQ people attempt to run for office in Mississippi. So there is an effort to do that. But yes, we need more folks to run. I think that the fear that people have of not being elected because of their being openly LGBTQ it may be exaggerated, because I do think that people are ready for that. So we need young people, especially, to see leaders who look like them in so many ways, but certainly who exist in the LGBTQ spectrum. All right, I'm sorry, I'm starting to. Did I get it now?
No, you're perfect. You're perfect. Perfect. So Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight and just having this amazing conversation with us. And it's good to see your face again.
Y'all too, and I appreciate this opportunity. And I'm easy to contact if anybody wants to get involved in this movement. Holler at me.
Well, I was going to say, HRC is a nonprofit organization, and y'all take donations, and you love to send out some email newsletters. I
tell people, Donna, I'm not just preaching love and inclusion. I have to pass the plate too. Still.
Well. Speaking of passing the plate, y'all pass the plate to that one, but also pass the plate over here. And
That's right.
And I think that is there a graphic coming up from our producer here? I was going to introduce this graphic. I don't know if there it is. So this surprising Kimberly Griffin here, but Kimberly, this is her 50th birthday, is going to be later this month. So she is launching a $50 for 50 campaign. So if you just adore Kimberly Griffin, our publisher here, as much as the rest of us, one way you can express that is by donating $50 in her honor. If you'd like to donate $5 in her honor to the Mississippi Free Press, we would love that too. Or 500, whatever
or
feels good. Or 5,000. That's right. It happens sometimes. You look and say, "Oh man, where'd that donation come from?" So anyway, so this is the $50 for 50 Kimberly Griffin month, and y'all may or may. I love that picture. That's my favorite. Y'all may or may not be hearing about my $60 for 60 here in about a month. So I'm still getting ready to actually, I'm practicing talking about that out loud. But thank you for everybody, for all of you who showed up tonight to watch the show. Please share. As you know, we're on YouTube and Facebook Live, and a lot of people watch the show after the fact. I can't tell you who's going to be the guest yet next week. We're working on a very special guest. As most of you know, this is our third show in a week. It's been a little busy. So watch for in social media as well as on the YouTube channel, on Mississippi Free Press Facebook page. There is an amazing conversation with Dr. Dobbs, which most of the questions were your questions out there. And we're actually about to post a transcript of the whole thing and a podcast. And so, so please watch, read, listen to Dr. Dobbs talk for an hour about the Delta variant. There's a lot of straight talk in there, a lot of good advice. I learned things. Kimberly learned things. So please, please, please plug into that show. There was a great show a week ago with Carrie Lee Merritt, who is a historian who's kind of an expert on, speaking of intersectionality between poor whites and Black people, Civil War and Reconstruction era, where you'll learn a lot. So those shows are out there and so many others. So for now, though, we'll see y'all at MississippiFreePress.org, and you guys go subscribe to Rob's newsletter and throw some money in their tip jar too. Thank you, guys.
See y'all.